Hi, welcome back to Goats 101 Nigerian Dwarf Goat Style. I'm Pat Stewart at Hames and Axel Farm, and welcome back to my little attic studio. Um, I will try to get everything in that I was going to do. For some reason, I just taped this and it became unrecordable, so I don't know what happened. So I will try not to miss things again. Um, this session is supposed to be about goats, pets versus working goats. And I'm going to try and encapsulate it into you. So you think you want to get goats video, which I have done a lot of times. But if it were as easy as a 20-minute class, then I wouldn't be teaching a class that's hours and hours long. Um, Keeping goats is not like having a potted plant. And so there are things that go along with it. Um, I want to talk first about getting a pet goat and what's involved in that, and then how you can move on from pet goats to working goats to whatever you want to do with goats. So, if you want a pet goat, I would highly recommend that you consider a wether. A wether is a neutered male. You should have at least two of them because goats are companion animals, they're herd animals. They will not be happy on their own. Also, do not plan on tethering them out unless you are going to be there with them because they will freak out if they are tethered out alone. Um, it's again going back to what I talked about in an earlier class. They want to be in the middle of the herd. They know the ones on the outside are the ones in danger. If they are tethered alone, then they are the one on the outside and they are in danger and they know it. So if you want happy goats, have more than one. At least two, excuse me. At least two. If you're going to get a pet goat, you want something that's going to be pleasant every day. Um, that's what wethers give you. Wethers are the same animal every day. They do not have hormonal fluctuations. They do not pee on themselves if they're weathered properly. They do not smell. When we disbud a goat, we actually damage the scent gland on the top of their head. And when you see goats rubbing their heads like that, it's not just because that feels so good, it's because they're leaving their scent behind so that other goats know that they're there. When we disbud, we take that away. When a wether is castrated, we take away the testosterone, which drives that scent gland. So they're not nearly as strong smelling. In fact, don't really have a smell at all, as opposed to a buck who has quite a pungent odor. Now, that odor comes and goes with the seasons. In the spring, it's not so bad because they're not generally in rut. But rut starts in July or August and can go through until April. So if you've got a very sensitive nose, which I do not, um, you may be offended by that smell. I have 14 bucks at sometimes, and occasionally I can smell them. Most of the time I just don't even notice. But the one thing I do notice about them is that they pee on themselves. They mount each other. They beat each other up. Um, they're just being males, trying to be dominant, trying to do what they do, which is have the most access to the most breeding does as possible. Um, they can be much more difficult to handle than wether because the testosterone gives them a much stronger sense of pride. Now, I will tell you that goats have a very strong sense of pride anyway. You add testosterone to that, and you get a really stubborn creature. So that's one reason I recommend wethers over bucks. If you're going to get a wether, make sure that he is not weathered late, as in he's 3 or 4 years old and he just got weathered last month. Um, some of those, some of the behaviors will go away. The scent will go away, but not all of those behaviors will go away because at that time it's a learned behavior. So get your wethers young. Um, Bucks as pets, do not handle them like you would a wether. First of all, I see no reason to have a buck as a pet. But if they're going to be peeing on you and ejaculating on you, and rubbing on you and leaving their smell all over you. You don't want them cuddling up like they're a 6-week-old wether kid. And if they are allowed to do that as 6-week-old buck kids, they will think that's okay to do as 4-year-old adult bucks. So handle your bucks differently. Be gentle, be kind. You can treat them very well. Some of them are extremely personable, but don't set them up for being like, what happened to me? I'm the same animal I always was, but now you don't want to touch me. That makes them really sad. So that's why decide you want a wether and stick to it. Don't get a buck just because he's fancy looking. You can have a doe as a pet, and there are some does that will never have kids. Those are called intersex or free martins. And what happens is those animals actually have, just like humans, there are intersex people who have both male and female genitalia. In goats, if you have a grouping of 3 or 4 or more kids in a litter, in a grouping, and one of them is a doe and the rest are all bucks, the testosterone from those bucks is going to carry into her and will affect her development. So it used to be that the best teams of oxen were free martin cattle, does who were born to a twin brother, because they don't go into heat, they're not as stubborn, and they grew more sizable because they had some testosterone in their bodies, but not so massive that they couldn't be controlled. There are such things as free martin goats. So you may be able to find a female who looks like she's intersex, also called a hermy or hermaphrodite. And those should be priced the same way as a wether. And she should be a perfectly good pet, although she may act more bucky, in that she may make more blubbering sounds and she may be more aggressive when other does are in heat. But she doesn't have any functional systems. And then there's the regular does, which is 99.95% of all the does, which are does that are going to go into heat every 18 to 21 days. When they're in heat, they are usually loud. Not always, because that would be too easy to make a rule for a goat. But to just know that her hormones, she's going to get PMSy. She may get extra lovey, or she may get extra aggressive. She may be extra vocal, or she may be extra quiet. All of those signs are things you look for when you're trying to see if a doe is in heat. But expect them to be there, because that's just part of being a female goat. So, if you want a pet, a wether costs about $75 to $125 for most of us. Some people go higher than that. You don't need to pay higher than that. Bucks, for my bucks, they start at $250. Other people start their bucks at $400. My does start at $400. If I sell a doe that she winds up being an intersex, you get the money back. Or at least the difference to a wether. It's up to you. I mean, I had somebody who did have that happen, and they just wanted their money back. They didn't want to take her, except she was a wether. They bought her for a breeding stock. I don't blame them. She got her money back. So, you have to think about that when you're buying goats and planning ahead. But if you've got a goat, why not put it to work a little bit? They can be great therapy animals. They're great pets. But they're wonderful with autistic kids. They have an understanding of autistic children that's uncanny. It's much like a horse does. You can browse with them. If you've got an area that you want to expand your fence line or put in a garden, let the goats do the work. Skip the pesticides and the herbicides. Make sure that you've got anything hand-pulled or flame-burned. So if you've got mountain laurel like we do, or sheep laurel, which is also called lamb kill, you get rid of that. And then once that's out of their way, the goats will just go in and eat everything else. And then if you want to take the timber down, you can. Or just leave the trees there. The goats will appreciate the shade while they're eating the bark. Okay. Um, some people are actually being very successful now at hiring their wethers out, or their goats out to browse. If you're going to do that, make sure that you bring along water from home. You bring minerals for them to eat, and you have a containment set up because they don't understand where the rules are on somebody else's property. And I would recommend that you either stay with them or bring a livestock guardian dog so you don't lose them to neighborhood dogs. But goats can earn their keep that way. My favorite way to earn the keep with a goat is to have females. And then I get babies and milk. And with that milk, I can make cheese and yogurt and ice cream, gelato. We drink it, we bake with it, and we make soap with it. I have seen our medical bills go down since we've started drinking fresh milk. We'll talk more about that in the dairying section. But a working goat does not necessarily mean that you milk her every day, twice a day. It does mean you milk her every day or you give up milking her. But you can milk her once a day, that's fine. If you need to go away for the weekend, either leave her with her baby who will nurse on her, or find somebody to come milk her. Do not just leave her unmilked during that time that you're gone, or you will have a sick goat when you come home. So you have to think about that. If you've got wethers, generally just somebody stepping in to make sure they've got feed, grain, and hay. That's all you need to worry about. But if you've got a milker, you do have to milk her at least once a day. If you really want the milk flowing, you need to do it twice a day. So, what else do you have to deal with if you've got goats? Rabies is a concern for some people. One of the issues with rabies is that goats can get it, but there is no certified vaccine for it. Now, that doesn't mean we can't vaccinate the goats for it. If you were to give IMRAB or some other type of rabies vaccine that's good for cattle or good for your dogs or any of the other vaccines that are certified, it will protect your goat from rabies. It will not protect your goat from the government. By law, when they do certification tests to make sure that things are that's an effective vaccine, they want to see enough animals die from that test. Not enough animals die when they try to do a certified rabies vaccine. We've been doing rabies with goats for so long that if we were using the medications and our goats were dying, we wouldn't be using the medications. So when Cornell tried to get a test done, they did not have enough mortality. And so even though the test was successful and that nobody contracted rabies, nobody died. And therefore, there was no way to know that it worked or not. It's just a crazy way science works. Now, what that means for you is if your goat actually goes out and breaks somebody's skin by accident because they've put their fingers in a baby goat's mouth or something like that, then that goat is subject to being euthanized and tested for rabies. There is no blood test for rabies. It is done as a postmortem. So some places, if you vaccinate and you can prove that a vet vaccinated for you, some places will say, okay, quarantine them. And then we'll see if they contract anything, then you have to put them down. But other places will say, hey, there is no certified vaccine. You have to have your goat tested. That means your goat goes down. So if your goat does petting zoos or animal-assisted therapy or is handled by a lot of strangers, or if you live in an area that has a high incidence of rabies, it's a good idea to get them vaccinated. But I vaccinate my own goats. I know that will protect my goats, but it will not protect my goats from the government. Even if I have 60 goats, if I had to pay a vet $16 per head to do that on an annual basis, I would go broke. So I vaccinate my own goats, and I don't vaccinate them all. I vaccinate the ones who go to shows or the ones that are going to go into classrooms. The other thing you have to think about with goats in the government is the Scrapies Program. Scrapies is a disease that sheep contract and goats can get. It is similar to mad cow disease in the bovine, but it is for sheep and goats. It is highly contagious. And because there was a time, and hopefully it will be again, that sheep are an economic driver and goats are becoming an economic driver, the USDA is very concerned about their impact on imports and exports. So the Scrapie Eradication Program was set up so that the government would know who has sheep and goats. So if there is an outbreak, if there is an outbreak of Scrapie, they know who to look for. There are some concessions made for goats as opposed to sheep. Yeah, because ear tags do not work well in goats, generally the policy is every farm gets a premises code that the USDA gives your farm, and every animal that you produce on your farm gets an ear tag, and that ear tag is linked to the premises code of your farm. Now, ear tags don't work well in goats. Goats are very oral, so they will rip it out. Then they get ear infections from the wound, which require antibiotics, which means the milk is rendered useless. So, in order to avoid all of that, with a lot of lobbying, it was agreed that a goat who was tattooed and is accompanied by their registration papers is considered to have a permanent identification system, and they do not need to be ear tagged. If a goat is sold, or if it goes to a show, it needs to have its registration papers with it. They go with it everywhere the goat goes. Then if they go to a show and there's an outbreak of some disease at the show, they know which premises, which farms were there, which premises tags checked for to report to and make sure. A couple years ago, it was a disease called sore mouth. It was probably almost 10 years ago now. There was an outbreak of sore mouth. The animals were not supposed to be allowed in because they still had sore mouth. It wasn't visible, but the breeder talked their way through. And although the animals were not showing sore mouth anymore, within 24 hours, almost every goat at that show was. So if that had been Scrapie, that could have really been dangerous. Most of the time, a goat that gets Scrapie is because it lives with an infected flock of sheep. There was a time, probably 10 years ago now, where Michigan had a lone goat test positive for Scrapie. I spoke to the vet in Michigan, the state vet of Michigan, and he told me that his theory was the same as mine, that there had been sheep on the property and they'd been there under a previous owner. The new owners bought the property not seeing any sheep, not knowing that this problem existed. Scrapie got into the soil and the goat contracted it. So the goat had to be destroyed, and the land had to be labeled as Scrapie infected. And they don't really know how long it stays in the ground. If you've got a patch of land that no animals have ever been on, then you can move your animals once you've got a clean setup. You can set up on that clean land. But it's a nasty disease to deal with. Unfortunately, a few years ago, probably now almost 15 years ago, the government decided with the big ag people that they need to know where every single individual animal in the country was. From little chicks on up to bulls. And they tried to create the National Animal Identification System, or NAIS. NAIS does exist, but it has different levels for different species. So what they have done with goats at this point in time is say, if you are compliant with Scrapie eradication, then you're compliant with NAES. But we, as farmers or as owners of goats, need to be active in making sure we know what changes are in the law. I'm not going to go into the entire Scrapie eradication law. If you want to, you can go to the USDA website under APHIS, Animal Plant Health Information Service, and there's a couple hundred pages of law there regarding the Scrapie eradication program and the National Animal Identification System. What you need to know right now is that vets are refusing to work on goats who are not tattooed or tagged. They can lose their licenses. So either go ahead and let them tag them, or in my case, even my wethers, although wethers under 18 months are supposed to be exempt, I am now tattooing them with my herd name and their year of birth. So I have like HX1 is my herd prefix. LW1 would be the first wether born in the L year or the M year. This is 2020 is the M year. 2021 will be an N year. So when my goats leave here, they are given a piece of paper. It's not a registration, but if the vet says they're not tagged, at least you can show that they have been tattooed, and this is the information of where they came from, what the farm is, when they were born, and hopefully that will settle the vets down. Okay? It's not a big deal, but because it's becoming harder to be a farmer in America or to even have livestock in America, it's very important that we follow the rules, that we understand those rules, and that we stay on top of what's happening so that we don't get legislated out of existence. All right? So that's the upshot of keeping goats as pets, whether they're pets or working animals. That's the legality that you have to have, the things you need to be aware of. As far as housing and things like that all goats need, I'm going to be talking about that in a subsequent class. Basically, keep them out of wind and rain, keep them dry. Fencing, keep them in. Food, keep them fed. Water, keep them clean. More details to come. Okay? So thank you for coming, and I hope to talk to you Thursday night. Okay? Bye.